Daniel thought marrying Emma would be the biggest change of his life. He was wrong. The wedding itself was beautiful, the kind of ceremony people remembered for years, filled with laughter, dancing, and promises about forever. But no one, not even Daniel, realized that the promise which would truly redefine his future wasn't spoken at the altar. It happened much later, on an ordinary evening, when Emma looked at him with a playful smile and asked a single question that seemed harmless enough. "Would you do something embarrassing if it made me happy?" Daniel laughed immediately. "Depends how embarrassing." Emma disappeared upstairs and returned carrying a neatly folded navy blue dress. She placed it on the sofa between them without saying another word. Daniel stared at it, waiting for the punchline. She wasn't laughing. Instead, she quietly explained that she had lost a silly bet with her best friend before the wedding. The bet had been that whoever married first would convince their husband to wear one complete feminine outfit for one evening at home. Nothing public. No photos online. Just a private memory they could laugh about years later. Daniel burst into laughter. "You're serious?" Emma nodded while trying not to smile. "Only if you're comfortable. You can say no." He should have said no. Every logical thought in his mind told him to refuse politely. Yet something about Emma's hopeful expression made him hesitate. Marriage was about trust, wasn't it? If wearing a dress for 15 minutes made her laugh, maybe it wasn't such a big deal. "Fine," he sighed dramatically. "One evening. Then we never mention it again." Emma hugged him so tightly he almost couldn't breathe. "Deal." He had no idea that one word would quietly reshape everything he believed about himself. 20 minutes later, Daniel stood in front of the bedroom mirror, wearing the navy blue dress. It fit surprisingly well. Emma had guessed his measurements almost perfectly. She gently adjusted the waist ribbon before stepping back. "You actually look really elegant." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Don't tease me." "I'm not teasing." She walked over to her dressing table and picked up a simple shoulder-length brown wig. "Just try this too." Daniel laughed nervously, but allowed her to place it on his head. Suddenly, the mirror reflected someone unfamiliar. Not a woman exactly. Not the man he recognized either. Something in between. Something strangely peaceful. Emma tilted her head. "You're missing one thing." Before he could protest, she applied a tiny amount of lip gloss. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to soften his appearance. Daniel expected to feel ridiculous. Instead, he felt curious. He kept looking into the mirror longer than necessary. Emma noticed. "What are you thinking?" He searched for the right words. "I don't know." It was the truth. For years he had ignored tiny moments of curiosity, wondering what soft fabrics felt like, secretly admiring elegant shoes while shopping together, imagining how different hairstyles changed a person's entire expression. Those thoughts had always disappeared as quickly as they arrived. Tonight they stayed. Emma smiled gently. "Want to try walking?" Daniel laughed. Walking. Heels change everything. She disappeared again and returned carrying a modest pair of low heels. Absolutely not. 5 minutes later, he was wearing them anyway. His first steps were awkward enough to make both of them laugh uncontrollably. Emma patiently showed him how to stand straighter, shorten his stride, and let his shoulders relax. "You're fighting your balance," she explained. "Don't stomp. Let each step flow." Daniel repeated the movements again and again. Each attempt felt slightly more natural. He wasn't pretending anymore. He was learning. That surprised him most of all. When they finally sat down together with coffee, Emma asked quietly, "Did you hate it?" Daniel looked at the dress, then at the mirror across the room. "No." That single answer carried far more meaning than either of them understood. Over the following weeks, life returned to normal. Or, at least it appeared to. Daniel went to work. Emma continued her career. Their routine stayed the same. Yet every now and then Daniel found himself remembering the mirror. Not because of the dress itself, but because of the calm expression staring back at him. One Saturday afternoon, Emma caught him standing silently in front of a clothing shop. He hadn't realized she was watching. "You like that blouse?" she asked with a teasing smile. Daniel immediately looked away. "I was just looking." Emma squeezed his hand. "There's nothing wrong with appreciating nice clothes." That sentence echoed inside his mind all evening. Nothing wrong. Such simple words. Yet they quietly removed years of unnecessary embarrassment. A month after the wedding, Emma surprised him again. "I've got an idea." Daniel narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "That usually means trouble." She laughed. "Not trouble. An experiment." She placed a small gift box in front of him. Inside lay a beautifully wrapped cardigan in a neutral cream color. Soft. Comfortable. Elegant. "It's technically from the women's section," she admitted, "but honestly, clothes are just clothes." Daniel slowly touched the fabric. It felt incredibly soft compared to anything he owned. Later that night, he tried it on while reading a book. Emma looked up from her laptop and smiled naturally, as though nothing unusual had happened. No jokes. No teasing. Just acceptance. Somehow that made the experience even more meaningful. Weeks turned into months. Small experiments became regular evenings together. Different cardigans. Soft scarves. Comfortable knitwear. Eventually subtle makeup lessons. Emma never pushed. She simply answered questions whenever Daniel asked. Foundation. Concealer. Eyebrows. Color matching. Skincare. Instead of treating femininity like a costume, she introduced it as a collection of skills. Self-care. Presentation. Confidence. Daniel found himself enjoying the learning process more than he ever expected. He wasn't trying to become someone else. Instead, he was discovering parts of himself he had ignored for years. One evening while practicing eyeliner, he sighed dramatically after making another mistake. Emma laughed. "Do you know how many women spent years learning this?" Daniel smiled. "That actually makes me feel better." She gently corrected his hand position. "Slow movements. Don't rush." After another attempt, the line looked almost even. Daniel couldn't stop smiling. "I actually did it." Emma clapped proudly. "See? Progress." That night, Daniel stayed in front of the mirror longer than ever before. For the first time, he didn't just notice the makeup or the outfit. He noticed his expression. Relaxed. Comfortable. Confident. It wasn't about looking perfect. It was about finally allowing himself to explore without shame. He quietly whispered to his reflection, "Who are you becoming?" The mirror, of course, didn't answer. But deep inside, something already had. As months passed, Daniel and Emma settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Friday evenings became their quiet tradition. They would finish work, order dinner, light a few candles around the living room, and spend hours experimenting with outfits, hairstyles, and makeup. There were no cameras, no audience, and no pressure to impress anyone. It was simply a space where Daniel could explore without fear of being judged. Every week he discovered something new, not only about feminine fashion, but about himself. He learned that posture could completely change the way someone appeared. Standing taller without appearing stiff, relaxing his shoulders, letting every movement feel intentional instead of rushed. Emma explained that confidence wasn't something you wore. It was something people noticed when you stopped trying to hide. One evening, she handed him a notebook. Daniel looked at it with confusion. "Homework." She smiled. "Kind of." Inside the first page, she had written 3 questions. What makes you feel confident? What makes you feel comfortable? Who are you trying to impress? Daniel stared at the questions for several minutes. "I don't know how to answer these." "You don't have to tonight," Emma replied softly. "Just think about them." For the next few days, those questions stayed in his mind everywhere he went. At work, he watched people walking through the office. Some looked exhausted. Some looked nervous. Others carried themselves with quiet confidence regardless of what they wore. He realized confidence wasn't masculine or feminine. It belonged to people who accepted themselves. That Friday, instead of reaching for one of his usual shirts after work, Daniel quietly opened the wardrobe where Emma had made a little space for the outfits they had collected together over the past few months. Nothing extravagant. A few skirts, soft sweaters, elegant blouses, simple flats, and one beautiful emerald green dress that Daniel secretly admired every time he opened the wardrobe. Emma noticed him looking at it. "You wanted to try that one for weeks." Daniel laughed nervously. "Is it that obvious?" She nodded. "Very." He slowly lifted it from the hanger. The fabric felt luxurious in his hands. When he finally changed and stepped back into the bedroom, Emma's eyes widened. "I knew that color would suit you." Daniel looked down shyly. "I actually feel good." She walked around him, adjusting one sleeve. "Not because it's a dress." He looked up. "Because you're finally standing naturally." He realized she was right. The nervous stiffness that had filled his first transformation months ago had almost disappeared. His movements had become smoother. His smile came more easily. Even his breathing felt calmer. Emma placed a soft necklace around his neck. "There." Daniel turned toward the mirror. For several silent moments, neither of them spoke. The reflection looking back wasn't pretending anymore. It looked genuine, not because it perfectly resembled a woman, but because it looked comfortable. That difference changed everything. A week later, Emma suggested something Daniel never expected. "Let's go somewhere." His stomach immediately tightened. "Wearing this? Only if you want." Daniel shook his head instantly. "No chance." Emma nodded. "Fair enough." She never argued. That was something Daniel appreciated more than he could explain. She never pushed him past his comfort zone. Instead, she waited. Sometimes growth happened naturally. 2 months later, Daniel surprised even himself. "I've been thinking." Emma looked up from her book. "Dangerous." He laughed. "What if we drove somewhere quiet?" She stayed completely calm. "No crowds."
No.
"No people?" "Maybe." She smiled gently. "Your idea?" He nodded. "I think I'm ready." The following Sunday evening, they drove almost 40 minutes to a peaceful coastal town where the streets became nearly empty after sunset. Daniel sat in the passenger seat wearing a long beige coat over a simple floral dress. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Emma reached across the center console and squeezed them gently. "You don't have to leave the car." "I know. You've already done something brave by coming." He nodded. Several minutes passed. Finally, Daniel opened the door. The cool evening air immediately surrounded him. His heart pounded so loudly, he was certain everyone could hear it. Except there was almost nobody around. Only distant waves. A couple walking far down the promenade. A cyclist passing without paying the slightest attention. Daniel stood completely still. Nothing happened. Nobody laughed. Nobody pointed. Nobody stared. Emma smiled. "What do you notice?" Daniel slowly looked around. "No one cares." Exactly. They walked together along the waterfront for nearly 30 minutes. Daniel's first few steps were cautious. Eventually, they became natural. He noticed the sound of his heels against the pavement, the gentle breeze moving his hair, the feeling of simply existing without constantly checking whether someone was watching. For the first time in his life, he wasn't imagining everyone judging him. When they returned home, Daniel couldn't stop smiling. "I actually went outside." Emma laughed. "You certainly did." "I thought I'd panic." "You almost did." He smiled. "But then I realized something."
What?
"I spent years worrying about strangers who weren't even thinking about me." Emma nodded proudly. "That's a lesson many people never learn." Over the following weeks, Daniel became more interested in learning practical skills. Not because he wanted perfection, because he genuinely enjoyed improving. Emma taught him how different colors worked together, how accessories could completely change an outfit, how skincare mattered far more than expensive makeup, how confidence often came from preparation rather than luck. Daniel filled pages of the notebook Emma had given him.
He made lists.
Favorite colors, favorite fabrics, things that made him feel elegant, things that made him feel uncomfortable. Little by little, he noticed patterns. He preferred simple styles over dramatic fashion, comfort over glamour, natural makeup over heavy cosmetics, grace over attention. One evening while organizing the wardrobe, Emma laughed. "I think you've officially stolen half my closet." Daniel grinned. "I've upgraded it." "Oh, really?" He pointed toward one shelf. That section was chaos before. Emma looked. He was right. Everything was color coordinated, folded perfectly, shoes arranged neatly. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped a handbag. "I created a monster." "You created organization." As winter arrived, Daniel found himself becoming unexpectedly excited whenever they planned their quiet evenings together. Not because of the clothes, not because of the makeup, because those evenings had become moments where he felt completely accepted. No pretending, no expectations, just learning,
Growing.
becoming more comfortable with every passing week. One snowy evening, Emma placed another small gift box on the dining table. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Another experiment? She smiled. Open it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny engraved message. He read it aloud. Be exactly who brings you peace. Daniel looked at Emma. You really believe that? She nodded without hesitation. I married you. She smiled warmly. Not a version of you. The real you. Daniel's eyes became misty. I spent most of my life trying to fit into what everyone expected. Emma reached across the table. And how's that working? He laughed quietly through the emotion. Not very well. She squeezed his hand. Then maybe it's time to stop living someone else's expectations. That night, Daniel stood before the mirror once again. Not searching for flaws. Not comparing himself with anyone else. Simply observing. Months ago, he had seen confusion. Tonight, he saw peace. And for the first time, he wasn't asking who he was becoming. He was beginning to recognize the person already looking back at him. Daniel no longer measured his progress by how convincing his appearance looked. Instead, he measured it by something far more meaningful. Every month, he felt less afraid, less anxious, less trapped by expectations that had quietly followed him since childhood. He realized that confidence wasn't arriving because of makeup, dresses, or elegant shoes. It was arriving because he was finally allowing himself to explore without constantly apologizing for his curiosity. One Saturday morning, Emma found him reading a fashion magazine while making notes in a little notebook she had given him months earlier. She smiled. Research. Daniel laughed. I'm trying to understand why some outfits look balanced and others don't. Emma sat beside him. What have you discovered? He pointed at several photographs. Everything seems intentional. The colors, the accessories, even the hairstyle. Nothing feels random. Emma nodded proudly. Exactly. Style isn't about wearing expensive clothes. It's about creating harmony. Daniel looked thoughtful. I wish someone had taught me this years ago. She gently squeezed his shoulder. You're learning now. That's what matters. That simple sentence stayed with him for days. He began paying attention to details he had never noticed before. How different fabrics moved while walking. Why certain necklines changed the appearance of posture. How colors could completely alter someone's mood. He wasn't copying anyone anymore. He was slowly developing preferences of his own. One evening, Emma placed several outfits across the bed. Challenge. Daniel smiled. I knew there was a catch. You have 5 minutes to create an outfit. No help. None. He carefully studied every piece. Months ago, he would have chosen randomly. Now, he paused. He imagined where someone might wear each outfit. He considered balance,
Textures.
colors,
Shoes.
accessories. When he finally finished, Emma looked genuinely surprised. I honestly wouldn't change a thing. Daniel blinked. Really? She nodded. You've developed an eye for detail. He couldn't stop smiling. For the first time, he wasn't simply following instructions. He was making creative decisions confidently. The next few weeks became full of small discoveries. Emma taught him how different hairstyles framed the face, why slower movements often appeared more graceful than exaggerated ones, how smiling naturally changed someone's entire appearance more than any cosmetic product ever could. Daniel practiced almost every evening. Sometimes he succeeded. Sometimes his eyeliner ended up uneven. Sometimes he laughed after putting on a blouse backwards. Sometimes they spent 20 minutes trying to zip up a dress that turned out to be inside out. Those moments became some of their happiest memories. There was no embarrassment anymore. Only laughter. Only learning. Only acceptance. One rainy afternoon, Emma suggested something unexpected. What if we redecorated the spare bedroom? Daniel looked confused. What for? She smiled. Think about it. A month later, the empty room had become something completely different. One wall held a full-length mirror surrounded by warm lights. Another contained neatly organized shelves for shoes and accessories. A comfortable chair sat beside a small dressing table. Nothing extravagant, just peaceful. Daniel stepped inside after they finished decorating. It feels, he searched for the right word. Safe. Emma nodded. That was the idea. From then on, the room quietly became his favorite place in the house. Whenever work became stressful or life felt overwhelming, he would spend an hour there experimenting with different looks, practicing makeup techniques, or simply sitting with a cup of tea while reading. It became less about transformation, more about slowing down. One evening, Daniel looked through old photographs on his phone. Pictures from before the wedding, office parties, family gatherings, holidays. He noticed something he had never realized before. In almost every picture, his smile looked forced. His shoulders were tense. His eyes seemed tired. Emma quietly walked into the room. What are you looking at? Daniel showed her one photograph taken just 6 months before they married. I remember this day. So, do I. I thought I looked happy. Emma studied the picture. You look like someone trying very hard to meet everyone's expectations. Daniel slowly nodded. I think you're right. He scrolled to a recent picture they had taken together during one of their quiet evenings at home. No filters. No posing.
Just both of them laughing.
His expression looked completely different. Relaxed. Peaceful. Authentic. Emma smiled softly. That's my favorite version of you. Daniel looked at the screen for a long moment. I think it's becoming mine too. Several weeks later, they attended a costume-themed charity event hosted by one of Emma's colleagues. Everyone was encouraged to dress as a fictional character, making the atmosphere playful and welcoming. Daniel hesitated for days. Finally, he chose an elegant vintage-inspired outfit that fit the theme perfectly. As they entered the venue, his heart raced. But something unexpected happened. People smiled. They complimented the effort he had put into the costume. They discussed fabrics, colors, and accessories, just as they discussed everyone else's creative outfits. No one treated him like he didn't belong. Driving home later that night, Daniel stared quietly through the window. Emma glanced over. Penny for your thoughts? I spent years imagining the worst, and the worst almost never happened. Emma laughed. Our minds are incredibly creative. They're also terrible fortune tellers. She smiled. That's a lesson worth remembering. The experience changed Daniel more than he expected. He became less interested in hiding every part of himself. He still valued privacy. He still chose carefully where and when to express this side of himself. But the fear had lost much of its power. One quiet Sunday morning, he opened the notebook again. He turned back to the very first page. The 3 questions Emma had written months earlier were still there. What makes you feel confident? What makes you feel comfortable? Who are you trying to impress? This time, he answered without hesitation. Confidence comes from accepting myself. Comfort comes from being honest. I'm no longer trying to impress everyone, only to be true to myself. He closed the notebook with a gentle smile. Emma walked into the room carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She noticed the thoughtful expression on his face. Good answers? Daniel nodded. The best ones I've ever written. She handed him a mug. I'm proud of you. He smiled. Not because I learned makeup. Not because I learned fashion. But because I finally stopped treating curiosity like something to be ashamed of. Emma raised her mug. To new beginnings. Daniel gently tapped his mug against hers. To living honestly. Neither of them realized another conversation was approaching, one that would make Daniel look back at everything that had happened since their wedding and finally understand that the biggest transformation wasn't visible in the mirror at all. It had happened quietly inside him, one choice at a time. Daniel sat quietly in the spare room long after Emma had gone downstairs. The soft lights around the mirror reflected a person who had once felt like a stranger, but now felt strangely familiar. He remembered the first evening he had nervously agreed to wear a single dress as part of a harmless bet. At the time, he had believed the night would become nothing more than a funny memory between husband and wife. Instead, it had become the first page of an entirely new chapter. He smiled as he realized something unexpected. The biggest change wasn't that he owned elegant clothes or had learned how to apply makeup. It wasn't that he could walk confidently in heels or match colors without thinking twice. Those were simply skills. The real transformation had happened much deeper. For the first time in his life, he no longer felt trapped by the invisible rules he had spent years following without question. The following weekend, Emma suggested they take a short holiday to a quiet countryside village. They rented a cozy cottage surrounded by gardens, walking trails, and small cafes. It was the perfect place to slow down and enjoy a few peaceful days together. On the second morning, Daniel stood by the bedroom window, watching the sunrise. Emma wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. "Penny for your thoughts?" He smiled. "I've been thinking about our wedding." She laughed softly. "Most people remember the cake. I remember a dress." Emma couldn't help smiling. "I had a feeling you might." Daniel turned toward her. "Do you ever regret asking me that question?" She looked genuinely surprised. "Never." "Not even once?" She shook her head. "I didn't ask because I wanted to change you." "Then why?" "Because I wanted you to know you could always be yourself with me." Daniel looked down quietly. "I don't think I understood that back then." "I know." They stood together in comfortable silence as birds began singing outside. Later that afternoon, they wandered through a small local market filled with handmade crafts, flowers, and clothing. Daniel paused in front of a boutique displaying beautiful scarves. The shop owner smiled warmly. "Looking for a gift?" Daniel hesitated for only a moment. "Actually," he glanced at Emma, "I think I'm shopping for myself." The woman smiled naturally. "You've got excellent taste." There was no awkwardness, no judgment, just an ordinary conversation between two people discussing colors and fabrics. As they left the shop carrying a carefully wrapped scarf, Daniel laughed. "I can't believe how nervous I used to be." Emma looked at him. "Fear gets smaller every time you stop feeding it." That evening they sat outside the cottage, watching the stars appear one by one. Daniel finally asked the question that had been quietly sitting in his heart for months. "Who do you think I am?" Emma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at him with the same gentle expression she had worn on the night of their wedding. "I think you're someone who finally gave yourself permission to be honest." He felt emotion rising again. "I kept thinking marriage changed me." Emma smiled.
No.
"It revealed you." Those words settled deeply inside him. For years, Daniel had believed identity was something fixed, something everyone else defined for him. Now, he understood that identity could also be discovered. Not through fear, not through pressure, through patience, through curiosity, through acceptance. When they returned home from a holiday, Daniel decided to organize every wardrobe in the house. Emma laughed as she watched him arranging shoes by color and blouses by season. "You've become incredibly organized."
He grinned.
"I've had a good teacher." Over the following months, their home continued to evolve. The spare room became brighter. Fresh flowers appeared on the dressing table every weekend. The wardrobe slowly filled with pieces chosen not because they followed trends, but because they genuinely brought joy. Daniel also noticed changes beyond appearance. He became calmer at work, more patient with difficult situations, better at listening, more comfortable expressing emotions instead of hiding them. Friends commented that he seemed happier. Family noticed he smiled more often. Nobody knew the complete reason. They simply saw someone who had become more comfortable in his own skin. One quiet evening, Daniel opened the notebook one last time. Most of the pages were now filled with observations, sketches of outfit ideas, color combinations, personal reflections, and little lessons he had learned along the way. On the final blank page, he slowly began writing. "I used to believe confidence came from looking like everyone expected. Now I know confidence comes from accepting yourself. I used to think curiosity was something to hide. Now I understand curiosity is how we grow. I used to believe becoming someone new meant losing who I was. Instead, I discovered that becoming myself was the greatest journey I could ever take." He closed the notebook and placed it carefully on the shelf. Emma walked into the room carrying 2 cups of tea. "You finished it?" He nodded. "I think so." She handed him a cup. "So, if you could go back to the night I handed you that first dress?" She smiled. "Would you still say yes?" Daniel looked toward the mirror. The reflection smiling back at him no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt peaceful. It felt complete. He turned back to Emma and smiled with absolute certainty. I wouldn't just say yes. I'd thank you. Emma quietly slipped her hand into his. You know something?
What?
The title of our story was never really about marriage. Daniel laughed. No. She shook her head. It was about courage. He looked around the room they had built together, remembering every uncertain step, every mistake, every laugh, every lesson, and every moment that had slowly shaped his confidence. The wedding had introduced two people who promised to stand beside each other. But the life they built afterwards had given Daniel something even more valuable. Permission to explore. Permission to learn. Permission to grow. And above all, permission to become the most authentic version of himself. As he looked into the mirror one final time before turning off the lights, he no longer searched for the man he used to be or worried about the person he might become. For the first time in his life, he simply smiled at the reflection looking back. Because after one marriage changed his entire identity, he finally understood that the greatest transformation was never about changing into someone else. It was about finding the confidence to become the person he had quietly been searching for all along.